This is how they keep people sick. You're hurting because they want to hurt you. And boom, this person's in the triangle.
Feels like a self-own, like they are the ones driving the struggle bus.
Like, this was our problem with Jeremy Runnels when we first did the This Is the Show debunkings of the CES letter. Is it's like, okay, I'm sorry, it's not a faith crisis if it's 7 years later. Like, you don't go to the emergency room and say, I got an emergency 6 years ago.
Munchausen Syndrome by proxy. A woman will actually pretend that her child is sick in order to gain sympathy and validation and praise from other women.
All of the scriptural references used in this episode will be brought to you by scripturenotes.com. For a free trial to Scripture Notes, please visit the link in the description. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Word Radio. I am your host, Cardin Ellis. Today I am joined via Zoom by Brad Whitbeck as well as Dan Ellsworth for
Hello.
Public Square Magazine. You write for Public Square, right? That's the name of it?
I do.
Okay, rock on. And he had a fire, we can't call them tweets anymore, but he had a fire thread here on X today talking about anti-Mormon Munchausen Syndrome. Am I pronouncing this correctly,
Yeah,
Dan?
Munchausen Syndrome.
Okay, and I just, it was so revelatory. I just wanted to go over the whole entire thing right now. Brad wanted to jump on. So, yeah, let's just talk a little bit about your thread, its impact, how true it is. What is Munchausen Syndrome, and how does it apply to those that constantly besmirch and persecute the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Okay, so Munchausen Syndrome is when somebody pretends to be sick in order to gain sympathy and validation and to be cared for by other people. Now, what I talk about in the Twitter thread is what's called Munchausen Syndrome by proxy. And it's a phenomenon that's almost exclusive to women. And it's where a woman will actually pretend that her child is sick in order to gain sympathy and validation and praise from other women. So,
dude, you see this all the time, where I need to affirm X, whether it's a political worldview, a social worldview, an orientation, whatever. Because I don't want my kid to be a statistic. I need to be an activist, or my kid's going to be a statistic. And I love him so much that I need to make your life horrible now. You know.
And here's the thing. I just looked this up because, Dan, that shocked me when I was reading through your thread. I was like, seriously? It's mostly women? And so I looked it up, and you have from the National Institute of Health, it says almost all perpetrators of Munchausen syndrome by proxy it's 91% female, 1% female and male, and then 7% unreported.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like over 90%.
And we've always called them woke scolds. Like, the reason why we're so excited about this and we're interrupting you, Dan, is because we've called them woke scolds on the show for like 5 years now, or crybullies. But there's an actual scientific name for crybullyism.
Yeah, so this is it's an interesting thing. You see an example of it, and one that I put forward is from the classic horror movie The Sixth Sense, and that came out in like 1998, and that's where you have is it Haley Joel Osment? Is that his name? The young actor, where he said, you know, he's in the movie with Bruce Willis, and he says, "I see dead people."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that movie. People know that line. And toward the end of the movie, there's this horrifying sequence where he finds the ghost of a girl who had been poisoned by her mother. And then he helps the girl get a videotape of that to the dad, and the dad confronts the lady at the post-funeral gathering at their home. And he says, "You were keeping her sick." And it's this shocking moment in the movie, and it's Munchausen syndrome by proxy, right? So the lady was keeping her daughter sick and presumably, being praised by other people, especially other women, for being so caring and so selfless. And wow,
This is why faith crises never end.
Right.
Like, this is why
Yeah.
I've always said, like, you're no longer, like, this was our problem with Jeremy Runnels when we first did the This Is the Show debunkings of the CES letter, is it's like, okay, I'm sorry, it's not a faith crisis if it's 7 years later. Like, you don't go to the emergency room and say, I got an emergency. 6 years ago, I started getting kidney stone pain, and it's like, okay, this ain't like, no, okay, we're not dealing with an emergent situation if this started 6 years ago. And the second thing is like absolutely refusing to heal, refusing to, quote, get over it at worst or understand it at best. Just this absolute desire for the thing to be broken. If it's a human relationship, I want it to be broken. As long as I can blame the church and charge for my mixed faith orientation marriage counseling, then I get to make money off of it. As long as it can be broken, and you never fix it by learning epistemology, by learning what your actual real doctrine is, by learning, you know, not glorifying victimhood or brokenness. Well, then you could say, oh, he's just having a faith crisis right now, we got to work with, like, how much money is made off of bad therapy by just these cynical female pseudoscientific Munchausen Syndrome counselors just convincing women that they'll never ever get better, that it doesn't get better, and you can only at best hire me to manage the social symptoms. Like,
Yeah.
wow, I didn't realize there was a name for this. How come nobody's made this connection yet?
I've been kind of slow rolling. I mean, I've understood it for a while, but I've been kind of slow rolling it because it's kind of explosive, right? But you know, just this week, there was news that emerged that the husband and wife couple who spearhead the Latter-day Struggles podcast have resigned from the church, and everybody, there's all this talk of, oh, this is so terrible that this could happen. Why can't the church change to accommodate these people, and all this stuff? And I watched some episodes of that podcast back in the day, and all I saw was just validating grievances, validating grievances, validating grievances. And I wanted to be like the dad in The Sixth Sense and say, you're keeping people sick. You're keeping them sick. That's what you're doing.
Is this the article you're talking about? I think I saw this floating around Twitter where it says popular Mormon
From
podcasters resign from LDS Church a step of excommunication. Oh, so whenever you read a headline like that they're resigning a step ahead of excommunication, it means that they were radicalized online. They were anti-Mormons. They knew they were anti-Mormons long before the church did. And they're just doing the rage quit on quitmormon.com for clout instead of, like, I don't know, actually learning how to get along with their peers or help people. It's
Right.
the weirdest clout chasing. Like, I do not understand it. Like, why would you want to glorify victimhood?
Right. So you guys recently had the Fifes on, you know, to talk about the Light and Truth letter.
Okay.
And they're a model of the opposite of when you take a growth orientation and you say, okay, I'm going to do what's necessary to really dig deep and explore things, and whatever it takes for me to, you know, figure this out, I'm going to do that, right? That's the growth mindset. But Munchausen by proxy is like, okay, let's keep people sick, and I'm going to keep people sick, and I'm going to be praised for that. I'm going to be considered empathetic and caring and loving, and just keep people stunted in their development. They're never going to outgrow it.
And not only that, but I think you also kind of get to use those people as a shield for any criticism of you.
Yeah.
Because as soon as people start pointing out some of the things that you're doing and saying, hey, shouldn't you be doing this differently? Then they automatically go to, oh, do you just hate the people I'm trying to help? Right? Like like clockwork. That's immediately what happens. They use their people that they are keeping sick as a shield. It's it drives me crazy to see.
Dude, you got to read this article, bro. I haven't read this article. I'm reacting live, and that might be dangerous. All right, but look, this is how
I've read it. It's gonna be. Go ahead.
This is how you know how disingenuous clout chasers these authors are. Who wrote this? Jana Reese. Oh, of course, Jana Reese wrote this. All right. But it says, in 2022, sensing a need among her fellow Latter-day Saints, Valerie Haymaker, whatever, started the Latter-day Struggles podcast. Great name, by the way. You know, that's a good name. And if we were approaching it from the perspective of the Apostle Paul saying, hey, we're all sinners here, and making it kind of like this cool community building thing, none of us would
I don't
ever.
know, man. It feels like a cell phone. It feels like a self-own, like they are the ones driving the struggle bus.
Okay,
You know, like that's
maybe like
what it makes me think.
I like the name, but it says in 2022, sensing a need among their fellow Latter-day Saints, Valerie Haymaker, however you pronounce it, started the Latter-day Struggles podcast to address the faith crisis many Mormons are experiencing. Okay, let's define the word address. Does that mean like the fencing scars that the Germans had where they purposefully put like horse manure in the scars from fencing on their face, so it would produce this ugly, nasty looking but totally cool looking scar, and they would purposefully inflict more pain on it and not let it heal in order for them to have social clout? Or was it because they actually saw that people were suffering and wanted to help them? Well, if they actually saw that people were suffering and wanted to help them, that would require contextualizing issues, strengthening coping mechanisms. And that's one thing that nobody ever teaches. If somebody's having a health problem, these crybullies and woke scolds always say, oh, well, body positivity. You know, we don't have to teach how to eat more healthy. If you actually cared about the person, you'd teach how to eat more healthy. You teach how to incentivize exercise. You would provide an example and maybe mentorship on how to exercise and the most efficient way of exercising with everybody in their busy lives, how to take your blood pressure, all these other things, how to pursue health. But if not, and you just want to be a body positivity coach, now you're just profiteering in somebody else's pre-diabetes.
Okay, so Cardin, you hit the nail on the head, and this gets to the crux of it, right? When we talk about mental health, a lot of times what comes to mind is, you know, issues like psychosis, where somebody has a break with reality and they think they're the president of the United States and whatever. But there's, you know, the vast majority of mental health is like just adopting healthy patterns of thinking, healthy approaches to problem solving in your own mind, right? And developing those kind of mental and emotional muscles. And what you just described, you know, this example, if somebody says, oh, the problem is body positivity. Well, if I went to a therapist and a therapist told me, you know, hey, you have health issues and the problem is body positivity, then automatically the therapist is helping me to develop what's called an external locus of control, right? So you have your internal locus of control and your external locus of control. And all that means is like, where do you feel control for your life is found? Do you feel that it's found inside of you? Or do you feel like the problem is always outside of you? It's always other people. They need to adopt body positivity toward me and validate me, right?
Yeah. And Dan, I love what you're talking about with this external locus of control. It is something that I think is pretty rampant these days, that people are being given this external locus of control as kind of a cure for what ails them, because now it's just not their fault. Now it doesn't matter. But it's going against the scriptures. When I look at like Second Nephi 2, you can read that to act and not be acted upon as having an internal locus of control. Become somebody who focuses and recognizes the actions you can take to take control of your life, right? And have this internal locus of control. But I completely agree with what you're saying. The worst kind of therapy happens in giving people this external locus of control, turning them into a victim. Like in your thread, you had that what is it called? The triangle.
Drama triangle.
The drama triangle. I loved that because that's completely what happens here.
Dude, you know what? Let's can you just read his thread? Brad, I'm going to put it up on the screen because I want our audience just to see this. If you could just read his thread down to the drama triangle and then allow him to explain, that would like be totally awesome.
Sure, yeah. So Starting off with another podcast leading to church discipline. It's as predictable as anything because people follow incentives. A thread. In my recent visit to Thoughtful Saint YouTube channel to discuss Marxism, I brought up Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy, MSP, using this moment from the movie The Sixth Sense as an example. It is where someone who keeps another person sick or developmentally stunted and then basks in public praise for how caring and selfless she is. With the reward of public praise, particularly from other women, she finds herself unable to stop destroying a person in her care. I say she because there are no known cases of men engaging in MSP, something we just validated at the beginning of this episode from the National Institute of Health.
Yeah, that is crazy. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. For a recent true crime case of MSP, look up the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. However, there are plenty of cases of both men and women keeping people sick and developmentally stuck when it comes to their mental health and spirituality, then basking in public praise for being empathetic and caring.
Oh, dude.
And then next he says most exmo and nuanced podcasts followed the pattern of MSP, keeping people sick or stunted. I might say anti, because I've seen some ex-Mormons who are healthy in this regard. I think like Chris Hanna is one of them that it does not go this direction, right?
Right.
Yeah, but he doesn't try and keep people stunted.
You said most. You're fine.
Yeah.
I just know people in the comments are going to be going off on this. But most exmo and nuanced podcasts follow the pattern of MSP, keeping people sick or stunted, rather than help people to examine their assumptions, learning epistemology, and developing better definitions for gospel concepts. These podcasts practice reverse cognitive behavioral therapy. They promote cognitive distortions, emotional reasoning, and false dilemmas.
Dude, so much. Okay, keep going. I got to let you finish. Just.
Yeah. They validate people's delusions and their poor coping skills. They put their listeners into the drama triangle and give them the false illusion that they are doing really heroic things against oppressors.
Dude, you so freaking... There's 17 podcasts in all 17 phrases here. And by the way, my only pushback on what you said, Brad, and what you said, Dan, about the word Chris Hanna and whether or not, there's nuanced podcasts out here. He doesn't claim to be nuanced. The second you hear, well, there's nuance here, you always know it's going to be some garbage virtue signaling, some garbage progmo nonsense.
And what I will say is I was more saying it's not just every exmo. Because what I think, one thing that I see happening with this, Dan and Cardin, you see people like the John DeLynns of this world trying to claim all exmos as their own, right? When really John DeLynn is an anti-Mormon. And so when I think I am trying to be good about making it positive that I don't conflate ex-Mormons with anti-Mormons, because not everyone who leaves is an anti-Mormon in this way. But I think what you said, Dan, was totally valid. It's most exmo sessions are this way, or most exmo podcasts are this way, because most of them are anti. There are very few that aren't, right? So it's kind of a squares and rectangles a little bit. Dude. But I want to make sure that like in the audience, people understand, like when we're talking about these particular podcasts, we're not talking about just people who have left the church. It's not as if they're all out there doing Munchausen by proxy. This is something that's coming from these particular podcasts that Dan is highlighting.
Dude, and look at this. Rather than help people to examine their assumptions, which we so desperately need, the presuppositionalist arguments that religion is harmful is total pseudoscience, not backed up by any kind of data. I love this terminology. Rather than help people to examine their assumptions, one, learn epistemology, or how we know things, like how the Spirit can teach us, how science can teach us, how observation and naturalism can teach us, all of the above. And then third thing, and develop better definitions for gospel concepts. These podcasts practice reverse cognitive behavioral therapy. I got to tell you, I think everybody in America is a little bit OCD. and needs to understand cognitive behavioral therapy. I think it's one of the greatest advancements that the social sciences has put forth. Whenever anybody wants to say that, like, oh, psychology isn't a real science, man, no, you need to understand the fundamental attribution error and cognitive behavioral therapy. That needs to be something every high school senior can't go into the real world without, right? So I am a huge fan of therapy that involves cognitive behavioral therapy, but unfortunately it gets twisted by the woke version of therapy, the bad therapy that the book was written about, and it ends up doing the absolute reverse. So Dan, how is this kind of like Munchausen syndrome by proxy, or what we would call crybullyism, or virtue signaling, how is it reverse cognitive behavioral therapy? What is real cognitive behavioral therapy, and how is this perversion the reverse?
Yeah, so with real cognitive behavior therapy, you have these things called cognitive distortions, like black and white thinking, catastrophizing, where you just assume the worst about, yourself and other people, and you have like emotional reasoning. These are all cognitive distortions, right? And they're things that actually make you mentally ill. When these are your baseline, your patterns of thought, you become mentally ill. You're just not able to engage with the world very well. So a therapist practicing cognitive therapy is going to invite you gently to explore other ways of thinking, and not engage in catastrophizing, not engage in black and white thinking or blame and shame and all these other cognitive distortions. What we see, and this, when I first learned about the cognitive distortions, all of a sudden I was able to make sense of why years ago, when the Mormon Stories podcast community was coming online, I paid a visit there and I was like, oh my gosh, there's something really wrong here. There's something really wrong going on here. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to describe it. But when I first learned what the cognitive distortions are, I was like, oh, you have got to be kidding me. I mean, that's what they're just doing the reverse. They're promoting cognitive distortions. They're validating cognitive distortions. They're reinforcing cognitive distortions. So it's the reverse of what a therapist would do to make somebody mentally healthy.
Dude,
right?
and your number 9 in your thread was absolutely savage. I'm going to put it up on the screen right now. It says, and it's interesting that these toxic communities are full of, quote, mental health professionals, end quote. All
Amazing.
of the biggest anti-Mormon, ex-Mormons, and progmo anti-Mormons right now, they're all some genre of like life coach, therapist, doctor this, doctor that. And like you go look up their master's thesis and their doctoral theses. And it was like internet studies on coping sessions for anti-Mormons on how they could blame the church for their problems. It was like nothing good, like nothing at all. So, man,
this is how they keep people sick. Go back to The Sixth Sense, to that moment in the movie. You were keeping her sick. That when you look at these communities, you can see how they are keeping people sick.
Okay, well now let me play devil's advocate here though. Let me play
Okay.
devil's advocate here. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty in order to clean up a mess. And, sometimes you have to meet people where they are and they're not ready for hard truths, milk before meat. And even if we are trying to give them tough love, sometimes we can only, do it softly at first. So, just like you need to go to church for the wrong reasons sometimes before you understand the right reasons, maybe these people, in order to get help, have to kind of have a soft takeoff. So how could they not say they're just trying to help? They're just trying to help. They're just trying to help. Like, how can you determine whether or not someone is just trying to be a gateway drug towards betterness? And because we can't truly know their hearts. I would argue that you can after a while, that it just becomes self-evident. All right.
Yeah.
But like, what would you say to somebody who's trying to defend them like that? Brad,
you have some thoughts?
I think that Dan gave us a really good key at the very beginning of this episode. And it's if the person that you're working with is trying to give you an external locus of control or not, right? If they're telling you, hey, these aren't your fault, these aren't your problem, there's nothing you can do about these things, right? These problems are not anything that you have any power over. That is just, I don't think that's ever really going to be healthy. I think it is good to recognize the things that you cannot control, but to then go so far as to give you an entirely external locus of control, I think that's how you spot that these people are not on your side. They're not really going to be helping you because guess what? It feels good to think, oh, this isn't my fault. This
Right.
isn't my problem. None of these things, I have no control over it. My bad situation that I feel bad about right now, it's not my fault, right?
Right.
And the trouble is, in reality, it's probably not completely your fault, right?
Right.
But there's always something that you maybe could do. And so keeping that locus of control within yourself, I think is a very, very important thing. So that's something that I would say to watch for.
Yeah, so some time ago there was an article written in Psychology Today called Validation and Empowerment. And it
Hmm.
was by a guy who actually trains therapists. And he said you come across a problem where you're training a therapist and some of them have a hard time getting out of validation. So they're going to validate, Cardin, what you were saying, if somebody's not ready to make a change yet, sometimes just validating, hey, life is hard. Just saying something validating like that, sometimes that will kind of help them to loosen up a little bit and open up to making some changes, right? So validation can be a healthy thing. But what he said was, and he said female therapists in training tend to spend way too much time on validation. And sometimes they just don't even want to move into empowerment, which is where you're, okay, I've validated you enough. Now we need to talk about how you are capable of developing a better life. You are capable of making changes and doing good things. Some people aren't ready for the empowerment message yet. And he said male therapists often just jump over validation completely. And I believe him because I hate validating people, right? So we tend to write prescriptions right off the bat rather than say, hey, this thing you're going through must be kind of hard. And
Hmm.
I get that, right? So so that's the answer. If you're a bad therapist, if you are unwilling to ever validate, the pain of life, right?
Uh-huh.
You're also a bad therapist if you over validate and that's all you do. You don't bring people into
Hmm.
that sense of empowerment, the internal locus of control.
Wow, this is so interesting. I'm reading this article right here, and it says one of the biggest problems with pop psychology is not having a balance between validation and empowerment. And quote, if you don't validate sufficiently, distressed clients will resist the best empirically supported attempts to empower them to make their lives better. But if you
Hmm.
validate too much, they begin to identify with their pain or symptoms or the abuse they've suffered. They begin to identify with their pain. One of the biggest things and biggest questions that the Women of Ward Radio have brought up is like, why are there so many like ex-Mormon, anti-Mormon podcasts, but there's not like ex-Catholic, anti-Catholic, ex-Hindu, anti-Hindu, you know what I'm saying, podcasts out there? And it's because there's so much identity behind that. It's actually not nuance. It's identity. It
Yeah.
literally just becomes like an alternate identity. And you brought up a great point in, I think, number 10 of your thread, where you said, again, the incentives for doing this are powerful. These people are showered with praise for their empathy, and it's intoxicating. Then in the next thread, when they are
And
confronted for their
I want to add to that. It's like it's intoxicating for the person who is validating these people. It's also intoxicating for the person getting validated. They feel better. That's why these podcasts are able to grow in popularity, right? It
Yes.
is like a junk food sort of thing. It is not going to help you improve your life. It's not going to help you to grow as a person, but it is going to feel good,
the
right?
Yeah.
amphetamine for ADD actually does make me feel better. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like Adderall, right? So when they're confronted on their behavior, they experience narcissistic injury. They adopt a martyr complex and are again showered with validation and praise. For many, these emotional incentives are just too powerful to resist. Dude, it's like when John DeLynn called the cops on Kwaku for an internet meme. Just saying.
Not fun.
I can't sleep at night. I can't sleep at night. There's young black boys memeing me. You know, and I just see it. It's just like
drama.
Oh
well,
my
and the thing is, John DeLynn has gone to the point where he's weaponized this in a way that he fundraises off of it, right?
Yeah.
Remember how he like will show the church has this much money and I only have this much, right? The church is the villain and I am helping fighting for you, right? It's like, guys, stop. Like you clearly see he's setting himself up in opposition to what the church is doing, labeling it as responsible for all of your problems. And yet I see him very often engaging in what you're talking about here, Dan, where he continually leads people into just validating their problems. And maybe part of this is a difficulty of social media, right?
Yeah.
Where being able to like work with somebody one-on-one, you can find the right timing to balance validation with empowerment, right?
Yeah.
Where maybe part of the issue is with social media people, they are very often just going to be showing the beginnings of people's journeys where they're only validating over and over and over. And then that feels really good and it feels good for their listeners. And so it just balloons into something that is not helpful, whether that was their intention in the first place or not, right? It's just the incentives.
So sometimes validation is the only skill a person has, but then they get rewarded for it. They validate and somebody says, "Oh, you are the most empathetic person I've ever met." And oh my gosh, look at me. I'm important. I'm amazing. I've got all this empathy and I can validate and empathy and validate. But at some point you know, either you make the choice to move in the direction of serious growth and development, which is where you will go into like examining your own paradigm, your worldview, your epistemology, and all of those kinds of things. That's where growth is, and it's really hard. So, but, you know, a lot of these podcasts are just never going to take their followers down that road because it's hard. And it's not, you're not going to be showered with praise for asking people to do hard things.
Yeah. And honestly, that's part of why I think the gospel is difficult for people because it is hard following the pattern of the gospel and consistently doing everything you can to repent. That's a difficult thing to do. It's funny because I have seen atheists make the argument that like, oh, well, if God really wanted to like exalt everybody, he really did a horrible job because this is horribly inefficient. And I'm like, yeah, so is the gym. Like this is going to be that's just the fact of nature. This is a difficult process. Growth is difficult.
So what's this drama triangle and what's the fix? Because I love that you have. I'm sorry, you already explained the drama triangle, but
oh no. I want to dive into it a little bit more. I want to hear a little bit more from Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something, a guy who writes plays, and his name, I think it's Stephen Karpman. It's something Karpman. I think it's Stephen Karpman. Decades ago, he came up with the drama triangle, and he said, you know, this is kind of a human pattern that we engage in. We tend to, you know, make narratives involving this triangle as we're writing plays, but also in life. It's just so convenient to try to shoehorn everybody into one of the angles of this triangle, and of course we always make ourselves the rescuer hero, right?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
Okay, so this nuance puts them as generally the rescuer role in the drama triangle. Which would then, because if you want to be the rescuer, you need a charismatic victim, which is going to have to be some kind of persecuted minority of some sort, whether sexual minority, racial minority, ableism a minority. You can make a minority out of anything at this point, right? Except for Brad, who's just gorgeous. and white
I'm
and
Canadian.
cisgender. Oh, you're right.
We're a minority.
You're a geographic minority. So
The
anyway,
least minority
yeah,
ever.
literally the whitest guy on in North America, right?
Oh my
But
gosh, yeah, Snow White. That's the subset, right?
that's
For
funny.
Canadians.
So anyway, you're not going to put yourself. I mean, you want to be the glamorous person in this triangle, and the glamorous one is the rescuer, and that means that you have to create a victim, and you also have to create a persecutor. And if you can't change the persecutor, then you have to change the victim status of the person, or maintain their victim status, so you maintain your status as a rescuer. Yeah, that's awesome.
And something that I kind of see is they gatekeep the rescuer identity with the kind of behavior that they want people to continue, right? So they'll say, yes, you were a victim, that we're validating every problem you've ever had. And if you want to be like a heroic, good person like us, you'll share all of these ideas that we have about the horrible persecutor, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes this cycle that just keeps going down and down and down. And people just don't get better. I've seen people tire out. I've seen people just get exhausted by it, but I don't see people growing out of this almost ever. And so that's really hard to watch.
Dude.
Right. So imagine somebody's going through just kind of normal, difficulties with their faith, which is just a normal human experience, right? And they stumble into one of these podcast communities and they say, wow, I'm kind of frustrated. I'm trying to figure out this or that issue. And people just say, well, the reason why you're hurting is because look where you are in this triangle. You're a victim. This oppressive system has victimized you. You're hurting because they want to hurt you. And boom, this person's in the triangle. And then they make them into a rescuer of other people. Go and, confront your family, confront your relatives and all this stuff. And it's a mess. And again, they're just keeping
and the proof is ask one of these people that you engage with in the comment section, which is probably your first problem in the first place, right? Or ask some of these people that are attacking you on social media or wherever. Okay, ask them like, why do you care? You've left the church. They will always invoke the young people, future victims in the church that they're saving.
Yeah.
They will always invoke that. It's like, bro, you resigned from the church like 13 years ago. Like, what are you doing? I'm still trying to help the young X's, young Y's, the young, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're a self-promoting woke scold crybully who's virtue signaling through the night. You're not somebody who's saving anybody. Brad, what do you got to say, man?
The thing I want to come back to, though, is you were reading it earlier, Carton, in the letter, in the article that was by Jana Reese. And it was that this woman, Sister Hemmicker, whatever, I forgot her first name.
Valerie,
yes. So thank you, Dan. So she, I think, identified a real problem, right? She is looking at people who are experiencing difficulty. This is a real thing. This is part of why our show exists, right? Is because there are people dealing with difficulties in whether it's people in their ward, things in the gospel they're trying to understand, historical questions, whatever it is, right? It seems like she zoned in on a particular subset of that. But I think she was maybe actually trying to help, right? Like, I think that's...
Well, for a while, I will believe anybody was doing anything to help.
Yeah.
Like for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's been too long. Like
and at some point and at some point she turned into the person who's going to remove her membership before even going to the council. That was a huge red flag to me. When I saw that, I was like, that doesn't sound like you really wanted to stay, right? Like if that was your reaction, something has gone wrong somewhere down the line. And I wonder where it was, right? Like, was it after trying to address this problem? Was it because it became so easy and frankly lucrative, not necessarily monetarily, but emotionally, from validating people and seeing how much people are like, oh, you've helped me so much, right?
Yep.
That's a huge, huge thing. So I wonder where along the line she changed from I'm trying to help these people to, yeah, I'm out of the church over this, right?
Right.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say
Fascinating.
too is that this is how you also know that it's always political first. And it doesn't
Mm.
have to do with actually helping people with their faith, because this
Oh,
third
maybe.
paragraph says more than 1 million downloads later, it seems Haymaker or Homaker was right. Besides the podcast and its accompanying virtual community where current and former church members talk openly about hard things, the couple now offers classes and virtual support groups, yada, this and that. Keyword being more than 1 million downloads later. Look, okay, I'm not besmirching anybody, but it's not hard to come across 1 million downloads on a podcast. You only need a couple thousand people. You know what I'm saying? You need a mild to moderate following to get 1 million downloads. Now, look, I was very proud when I passed my first 1 million downloads. It was a moment. It means you actually did something formidable, and I'm not trying to besmirch that, right? But I've never seen Jana Reese or the Religion News Service ever highlight those that are helping people through their faith crisis on the conservative side that have far more than 1 million downloads. We get almost 1 million downloads a month here.
Hmm.
Across all platforms, we get almost 1 million downloads. Man, Jana Reese ain't knocking down Ward Radio's door to figure out how they're helping people through faith crises, because they might be doing it in a more traditional manner. They might be augmenting people's internal locus of control. They might be reframing arguments, contextualizing history, doing things that aren't ostensibly woke. So they would rather dig down to the bottom of the Apple podcast category to find somebody who clocked 1 million, downloads, as long as they got the blue church check mark. Then we can highlight it. They ain't offering Greg Madsen a highlight. You know what I'm saying?
I want to ask a thing because I'm curious about this. Because Carden, a couple of times you've mentioned that this is like the woke scolds are doing this kind of thing. I wonder, Dan, would you characterize that as more of a symptom of this? Like it's kind of outside. Is it this Munchausen by proxy sort of thing that generally motivates that, or how would you tie
It,
those?
it's kind of, it's kind of a system that feeds on itself, that feeds
Okay.
itself, right? You get this validation and praise for being empathetic, and then you identify, here are the bad guys, and they engage in patriarchy and all of these kinds of things, right?
Mm,
And so you're keeping them in the triangle with an external locus of control.
hmm.
They are validating you, you're validating them. And another mental health term for that is codependency. It's when people
Mm.
feel like they're being loving to each other, but they're actually dragging each other down, right?
Yeah.
And that's the dynamic of these podcasts.
Gotcha. And see, the thing that I want to make sure we avoid is doing the same thing, right? And
Sure.
ending up falling into this political trap where it's like, well, I mean, clearly Jenna Reese has her political ideology. She's clearly on the left and would definitely view our show as conservative, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of being like, hey, yeah, the persecutors are the woke scolds and the liberals, right? Like that's not healthy either. So I think it's important for us to recognize the actual nuance of where people are at, how they can grow, and how they can become better. Because
Dude,
the real enemy always comes back to our adversary, right?
do you remember that Tom Hanks SNL sketch where he played like the MAGA hat wearing, "This is how they get you"? Do you
Yeah.
remember that SNL
I
one?
saw one a few years ago. I saw there's a new one maybe, but I haven't seen
Oh,
that
maybe
one.
there's a new one, but I saw the
Yeah.
original Tom Hanks one where he's like, no, that's how they get you.
Yeah.
And it was so
Black
funny.
Jeopardy.
This is how, was that what it was? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
It
Awesome.
was a
So
funny
good.
sketch.
Dude, hilarious. Those guys are hilarious, right? Well, this is how they get you, right? Look at this wording. This wording is so pernicious, and nobody ever calls him out on it, but I call out Jana Reese for this. In one situation, Valerie said she was counseled by a priesthood leader to follow her therapist's professional standard of care when working with people privately, even if it contradicted the church's teachings. No, they're always trying to twist the framing of a situation to represent religion as harmful. Whereas we had, go look up just last week, we had, oh my gosh, what was the therapist's name? She said it's called positive self-determination, which is an emphasis on basically, quote, moral free agency, and that there is no standard of professional care that is out of tune with the gospel self-actualization. They might be different words, right? But if you are a true professional who is interested in the well-being of your client, you're not going to be doing something that is against the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yet here they love framing it that way. She loves saying, well, I stay in the church even though I know it's bad for the others. Because like, as long as they can just say like, it's that little dig. They always have that little dig that's like their little pat on the back that like, oh, she was counseled by a priesthood leader to follow her therapist's professional standard of care when working with people privately, even if it contradicted the church's teachings. Like, that is so intellectually dishonest. That is so pernicious. And she knows that's not true, but that's the virtue signal. That's where they get you right there. Sorry, I veer verbose.
I would say, Cardin, this is where I want to see how precise we can get in our criticism of certain things, because what it comes down to is the adversary has certain tools that he wants to use, right? Mm-hmm. One of those, I believe, is giving you an external locus of control and turning you into an object to be acted upon, and not someone that can be acting for yourself. And so I think it's appropriate and called for and necessary for us to call out people who are doing that kind of thing, who are preaching those kinds of things that lead people down that kind of a path, right? And hopefully call out those teachings in a way that we can help them realize, if their goal was really to be helping people, here's a way that you're not helping people, right? Let's adjust. Let's course correct, right? Give them the opportunity to try something like that before going down the path, just pushing them into, I think, digging in their heels and being like, oh yeah, of course the persecutor says that I'm bad, right? And it continues their black and white thinking in this negative spiral.
Okay.
Right.
So I was just trying to look up when you said when you want to be like more specific and exact, I was trying to look up on her video the name of the therapist that we just had on the Women Award Radio less than a week ago, and I can't find her name. I didn't even put it in my own video description. I'm going to have to put it. I know, this is horrible. This is a podcaster fail right here on YouTube that you are watching in real time. So here's my question before we wrap this up.
Cardin.
Yeah?
It's not your fault.
It's totally not your fault.
Yeah, it's your software's
You're oppressed.
fault. Yeah,
you're oppressed.
Yeah, dude, for real. So, the title of the video is "Married Mormon Sex is the Best Sex." If you want to see a fully active, full-fledged, awesome LDS sex therapist talking the sex positivity of the Mormon Church, but one of the topics they covered in the conversation, though, was how the gospel is not out of line. Best practices in counseling in the church are not out of line with best practices in therapy. That anybody that's saying that is just trying to twist best practices of therapy and misrepresent them, or twist the doctrine of the church and misrepresent it. And that's what I feel Jana Reese is doing in this article when she says that priesthood leaders told her to, be honest, even if the church says not to be. And it's just pernicious. So before we go, here's my question. Dan, I love how you took something we're all feeling on an emotional level and you were able to distill it down to soundbite, x.com post-sized phrases here using professional terminologies. I love it when a feeling is finally given a name, right? And you basically gave it a name. So what's the fix? Like, now that we've positively identified the problem, you got people that are weaponizing empathy. They're doing harm to others in order to virtue signal their care for them. They're creating victims so they can say they're rescuers in the drama triangle. And it's what's the phrase that starts with an M again? The marsupial complex.
Munchausen.
Oh, the Munchausen. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I know it's
Marsupial
not marsupials.
complex.
So the
yes, indeed, the kangaroos. They're very, very evil.
Damn koalas, you know. But
Yeah.
anyway, okay. So you've got the Munchausen complex by proxy going on here. Well, how do you combat this? Because one of the biggest, most frustrating aspects of fighting this type of pernicious insinuation that if you do not agree with my very politically progressive agenda, it's because you must hate these vulnerable and suffering people, you know? So what's the prescription? We've now identified the problem. What's the prescription for fighting this? What can the average bear do when someone's trying to weaponize their empathy and they're seeing this Munchausen complex by proxy going on? How do they lock and load and actually fight it?
So this is going to sound really cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's love, share, and invite. You know, just let somebody who's in that trap know, hey, I care about you. And for that
well, if you
reason,
cared about me, you would be body positive and you would go eat a fifth burger with me and wash it down with a thing of root beer and a bunch of Reese's peanut butter cups
right.
and validate me. You're not validating me.
Some people are honestly going to give you the equivalent of that response, and you probably can't reach them. But some people you can reach. Some people you can say, I care about you. I see you in this trap. I see you in this quicksand that people are, you know, keeping you in, right?
Well,
They're
that's just
keeping you
religious
sick and
zealotry saying
stuck.
I'm going to hell, and I'm rejecting that because religion is harmful and it just keeps you in that, you know, in that mindset that I'm wrong and I'm not wrong. God may be perfect and beautiful. In fact, I'm just trying to follow the true principles the gospel taught me as a young child, that I am perfect the way God made me.
And that is,
I want to point something out with this. That is a level of black and white thinking that is super negative, whether you're in the church or out of it. That's a kind of black
Like,
and
why
white thinking.
can't you
need
just
to move
validate
past.
the struggle, the suffering? Like, why you are literally delegitimizing my lived experience.
right. And I can validate that life is hard. I can validate that, you know, undergoing a shift in thinking is hard. But because I care about you, I am going to tell you that you are empowered to move beyond that, to get out of that quicksand that people are trying to keep you in.
Yeah,
right?
okay. I don't have response.
And I
Good job.
invite you to listen to some different voices. And who would you guys recommend as far as different voices?
Oh, gosh.
The Holy Ghost. I think that's one that gets so ignored. And I think when you talk about the reverse cognitive behavioral therapy, that was horrible. Reverse cognitive behavioral therapy. One of the things that they do is they start telling people that, like, oh yeah, no, spiritual experiences, they're not real. They never happened, right? These aren't
Right.
a thing that they're not valid if you had them, right?
Right.
And they eliminate other voices you could be relying on, like the voice of the Holy Ghost. I think go to the scriptures. You will get so much more out of reading the book of Proverbs than I think maybe any podcast ever
Yeah.
at all, right? Like even Proverbs alone. But the scriptures are amazing. And are you looking more for like any specific voices here, Dan? Like people that we think
So
are
I think I'll be blunt, you know, and I'm not just blowing sunshine. I think Ward Radio puts on a lot of great voices. You guys put on, you know, the Fifes recently talking about the Light and Truth letter. So if you're stuck, how do you get unstuck? Well, look at people who have been where you are, who have actually emerged strong from the experience, who are not stuck anymore, and say,
That's
what
good.
did they do? What are the things that they do? And this is true of every area of life. If I were going to learn how to deck out a studio for podcasting, who would I go to? I'd go to Cardin, right?
Yep.
Not somebody who fails at doing that. I would talk to somebody who actually succeeds and does it well, and see what I can learn from them. those are the voices you want to go to, not validating voices who just keep you in that emotional quicksand.
Okay, so his name is Dan Ellsworth, and he is offering the reverse of what all of the bad therapists offer in Faith Crises. He is willing to role play awkward conversations around the Thanksgiving table with your blue-haired loved ones that have decided to make telephone pole Facebook posts about how bigoted and racist you are, and euphemistically tell them that they're being lied to and they're trapped in quicksand, and invite them to listen to other voices. You know, you got me. We did tit for tat for a little bit. We did, you know, some philosophical fisticuffs there. But by round 3, you had me, my man. You had me. And I want others to experience the beauty of what I experienced. So any final thoughts before we put a bow tie on this one, my man? I loved it. Any other final thoughts? Brad, Dan, you got anything before we go?
I just want to say, if you're in one of these communities and you're recognizing that this has been the dynamic that you've been experiencing, come out of it. Come out of it. There are so many people who would love to hold your hand and help you out and help you get to a better place.
That was lovely.
Yeah.
That was
good.
just, you know, you're
Awesome.
one internet pull away from getting your PhD and a life coach certificate and just being able to make 6 figures on this, bro. You're the real deal, Dan. So where can people find you? If they liked this, where can they find other stuff of yours?
I'm on X, and I also have a YouTube channel called Latter-day Presentations, where I PowerPoint people to death on gospel stuff.
It's like the opposite of Latter-day Struggles, you know?
Yeah, it
where
is.
if Latter-day Struggles is a struggle session, you've got Latter-day Presentations, where it's just straight up, here are the factual things that may be helpful to you and how they can be helpful to you. I really think Dan gets really good stuff out in his presentations, and I think we should talk about more of them too, because he's done some really fantastic ones on prophets, on how to recognize true prophet and how to understand how you're dealing with that in the world. He's got really good stuff. So I definitely want to plug Latter-day Presentations again. It's super helpful. But yeah, I guess my last words on this one, Carden. This one gets so complicated so fast because people's feelings are involved and they're so difficult to navigate without hurting other people, right? Because I don't think anyone goes into this thinking, despite what some of these podcasters might say, people from the church are not in this to like control you or make you sad or come in and be your persecutor. I think it's fascinating because Satan's been trying to redefine love as nothing but validation, right? That if someone loves you, they will validate you into oblivion, right? That's
Yep.
Satan's definition of love. Where God's definition of love includes, hey, if you love me, keep my commandments. Love God, love your neighbor, try to uplift them, help them, bless them, be as good of a person as you can, right? I think that those things are included in what God wants us to be doing. And it's difficult. Like this is an intentionally difficultized, that's not a word, thing
Made
that
more
we're
difficult.
Yes, this is intentionally made more difficult because it benefits the very spiral that Dan is talking about. That's where the incentives lead to, both emotionally and often when you get into things like, hey, we're going to have this life coaching session with you. Now it's monetarily incentivized, right? So it's a difficult conversation, but I hope, like Dan said earlier, anybody who feels like they've maybe been trapped in here and they felt like, hey, I've been really mad at the church or people in my family for years, and I feel like I haven't been able to get out of it. Maybe look at some of the things that Dan Ellsworth is talking about. See if there are ways to start empowering yourself to grow out of these things. We're not here to just say, get over it. You should always have been okay and fine. Like, we're not here to invalidate everything you've ever experienced, but we are trying to let you know there needs to be a balance between validation and empowerment.
Yep.
Brad Whitbeck for Profit 2032. You know, millennials will
For
never
profit.
get our
Yes,
president.
give me money.
We'll never get our president, but we can have our apostle, baby, and
Oh my
hopefully
gosh,
our prophet. You know
Hey,
what
no.
I'm saying?
If Canada becomes the 51st state, do I then get the opportunity to run for president?
Dude, bro.
Hey!
It
So
is
you're saying there's a chance, right?
dude, that is worth conquering Toronto tomorrow.
Oh my
just
gosh.
to make you a chance to be one of our colonial citizens that can now run for the office of most powerful man in the land.
gosh.
That is worth imprisoning Justin Trudeau. Labor camps
my
are the
gosh.
moderate position.
Carden, he stepped down. You know that, right?
Yeah, well, I'm surprised he could walk after crossing his legs so hard for so
Oh my
long
gosh,
in the
Carden.
Oval Office. You got to admit, that was a super effeminate leg crossing.
Oh, I don't think I've seen it.
Oh, yeah. They were memeing Justin Trudeau hard for sitting there. He looked like a Relief Society president in the Oval Office. Yeah, it was really funny.
My gosh.
So anyway, guys, his name is Brad Whitbeck. Okay, he's a scholar, a gentleman, an actor, and we believe a future leader in the church. Dan Ellsworth has no hope of being a leader in the church for the
Correct.
heretical things that he says in Public Square magazine. But you can read him there, and you can follow him on X for this and more. Please make sure you check us out at wardradio.com.